you, Katie. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us for our first of a series of workshops designed to just kind of reintroduce or retrain or refresh, depending where you are in your work story. Individuals in financial aid about our state scholarship and grant program. So again, this is the first of the series of programs. We'll do one probably every week from here through October. So if you haven't got the email, please reach out. We'll do a program a week. And should be a good time. So today we'll start with our Hope and Life programs. And as Catherine said, again, we'll make these available for, I guess, viewing on the CHU website once the last workshop is done. But also, as we're going through these regulations, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, or you can save them to the end. I should have some time to answer all the questions that we have. If for some reason we do run out of time or it runs long with questions, we will answer them and send them out to anybody who attended this call, just so you have them. For anybody who's interested, and all of you, I think, are interested, you can find the regulations that we're about to go through on the CHE website at this tab for institutions and educators. And again, the link to the once you click on that tab, you'll see scholarships and grants, and then each program listed will have their regulations and statute listed underneath their section of that page. And here is look, once you click on the link, here's what you would see. Again, our regulations are listed out. So are the statutes for each of the programs. And so it's a really quick, easy find. It also has our free tuition for residents over 60, just in case. And any relevant policies and memos that we've sent out will be on this page or near this page as well. So with that, we're going to start off with some sections that pertain to all 5 of the scholarship and grant programs for the most part. We thought it'd be easier just to go over those before we went into the sections that are very specific to the Life and the Hope program. Again, any questions you have, go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll get to them. First thing you'll see in all 5 of the programs is a section about general definitions. And so these are definitions that are pretty much in each of the 5 regulations. There are some nuances in each of the definition sections, but for the most part, we're looking at defining the programs in the same way for the most part. For example, one of the definitions we do highlight here is an academic year. You'll find that in all 5 of the programs, we define an academic year as a fall, spring, and summer, or defined as a 12-month period during which a full-time student is expected to earn 30 credit hours. And again, I won't spoil the highlights, but again, Life and Permanent Fellows and Hope. Life and Hope and Permanent Fellows will have a different credit hour measure, but we're still using the same time period for which a student has to earn those credit hours. And again, that is fall, spring, and summer. And what you'll see on each of these slides, by the way, especially for the section that applies to all scholarship programs, is you'll see where you can find that particular definition in each section of the 5 major regs that we have. And again, this will be available for everybody after the last workshop. Well, in each of our programs, or at least for Hope, Life, and Permanent Fellows, we do define a home institution as well. It's going to be defined as that independent or public institution where the student is currently enrolled as a full-time degree-seeking student be made eligible for financial aid at the same institution. So wherever that student is receiving that financial aid, that is going to be that student's home institution. And of course, for our programs, you're going to have one home institution, and that's going to be where you're degree seeking and where that student is receiving that aid. Continuously enrolled, you'll find this in the Life and the Permanent Fellows regulation. We try to make sure the regulations have the same definition wherever it's possible. So again, whatever you see in one, you should see something very similar, if not identical, in that other regulation. We define continuously enrolled as that enrollment without an interruption that's going to require the student to pursue a formal process of readmission to that institution. Now, students who are enrolled in internships, co-ops, travel studies, exchange programs that are approved by the home institution are going to be considered continuously enrolled. So even in that period where they're doing a study abroad or a co-op, or they're not physically at your institution, as long as you've approved that co-op, study abroad, internship program, we still would consider that to not be a break in enrollment. Date of initial college enrollment. This one is really important definition, especially for our scholarship programs. We say this is the first time a student matriculates into a post-secondary degree granting institution after high school graduation or completion of a homeschool program. We do have one exception to be the summer immediately following the high school graduation. So that summer, right after high school graduation, we do not consider that to be initial college enrollment. Now, obviously, the initial college enrollment is important for any number of reasons, but for the Life and Hope program, it is especially important because this is where we start the students' terms of eligibility. And so in most cases, it does start with that very first class after high school graduation, or the very first college class after high school graduation, with the exception of that first summer after that graduation from high school. And again, this is why this is really important, because the Life Scholarship, actually all our scholarship programs operate on a scholarship clock. We call it a clock or terms of eligibility. And remember, those terms start with that first class. So we call that initial college enrollment. Again, very important, because once we start that clock begins to run for every semester after that. That's a fall or a spring. And it runs whether the student is in state, out of state, part-time, full-time, or not going at all. Once they take that first class, they start the clock. And at that point, they become responsible for meeting the credit hour requirement and GPA requirement. So again, that first class is very, very important. Just being sure that you're checking it as an institution, just to be sure that student hasn't started their clock for the scholarships at any other institution. And again, that does fall on the institution to make sure. So with that, we'll go into some more general eligibility requirements. Now, again, these do apply to all 5 of the programs. Got to be a South Carolina resident. Can't say that enough. Student has to be a South Carolina resident. This is not a residency presentation. We do one of those every summer. If you have residency concerns or questions, if your residency officer on campus is not available, or if you are the residency officer and you just want to run something by us, please feel free to give us a call. We do help with residency determinations. Now, obviously, all residency determinations are made by the institution. And I say this every summer. So after I'm able to give you as much guidance and assistance as I possibly can, at the end of our call, I'm always going to say, great, it was good talking to you. Now, please go forth and make your decision. And if you want to let me know how that works out, that's fine. Otherwise, we're going to place it back in your hands to be sure you have all that you need. Also got to be a U.S. citizen and legal permanent resident. By this, we do mean at least having a green card if the student was not born here. One thing I do want to stress here, because I don't think it's any other place, visa students are not eligible for a state scholarship. So if a student is here on a visa, they are not going to be eligible for a state scholarship or grant. Students got to be enrolled as a degree-seeking student at eligible South Carolina public or independent institution, can't owe any refunds or repayments on state or federal financial aid, and cannot be defaulting a federal student loan, and then can never be convicted of any felonies and not have been convicted of any second or subsequent alcohol-related drug misdemeanor offense within the past academic year. So a student is able to have a alcohol or drug-related offense and still maintain the scholarship, but only one. On that second one, they are going to lose the scholarship. The one exception to this is lottery tuition assistance. And I think Tanya will do that presentation in a few weeks, and she'll make that distinction as well. Financial aid awarding language. This is in all our programs. We inserted this a few years ago as we started to see more and more institutions promoting wonderful packages that allow students to receive really cool financial aid packages. We wanted to be sure that they were still including or mentioning the Life Scholarship somewhere in that financial aid name or description of that award. The General Assembly went through years of planning and working with CHE and institutions to develop and create a life program that is distinct in nature. It is its own living program. And so we want to be sure it receives the recognition that they intended to have when they created the program. So as you are creating your programs, even your free tuition programs, we want to be sure that you're upfront with students. If any part of that program or that package is included in the Life Scholarship, we want you to be sure you are letting that student know. One of the things we have seen in the last few years is more and more phone calls where the student has gotten that free financial aid package, or they're getting free tuition from a school in South Carolina. And they're asking where the Life Scholarship is. And most of the time, the Life Scholarship is a part of that package. And that's how they got to be no cost or free tuition. And so we just want to be sure that, again, as you're developing these programs, as you're promoting them, we think they're amazing. We love them. We want them to continue. But as you're doing it, please be sure that you mention the Life Scholarship and your promotion of those packages. Ranking options for out of state. So you'll notice in the Life and the Pamela Fellows program, we do have rank as a criteria for the scholarship. We want to be sure that just because a student is graduating from an out of state high school, they are not excluded from possibly using rank to qualify. Now, in order to use ranking options for the state scholarships, Life for Pamela Fellows, we do want to be sure that the high school or homeschools from out of state are able to still submit their students or send their students to you and still possibly receive the scholarship. So these sections are the same in the two scholarships for the most part. What it says is high schools or homeschool associations that do not rank as a policy, or high schools whose grading policy deviates from the SCUGP and who don't convert the class to the SCUGP must use a standardized test score and GPA to qualify. So if you have somebody who's coming to you from an out-of-state high school, they have a couple options. One thing you would do is look at their, first be sure they have a rank policy. You can ask us because we want to be sure we have their rank policy on file as well. So if you have an out-of-state high school, they say they rank, ask them if they sent their rank policy to CHE. We do keep all rank policies we have on file. If we don't have one, they will need to send us one. If they don't have one because they don't rank, that student is not going to be eligible to use the scholarship or to use rank to qualify for the scholarship. That student can use GPA or standardized test score. If you have a high school that has a rank policy on file with us, or they're able to send us one because they have one in place, and that school ranks, the next thing you're going to want to do is check that grading scale. If their grading scale is, if the grading scale is the same as ours, or more difficult than ours, and so we mean maybe based on a 7-point scale, that student can use the rank from the out-of-state high school. If that grading scale is easier than ours, or you're unsure about it, we want you to give us a call at CHE. We'll help you work through whether or not that policy is able to be used, or that grading scale is able to be used for rank. If it is not, then what we'll do is we'll ask that out-of-state counselor to convert the entire class to the SCUGP, and that's probably where you'll get a little pushback. But if the grading scale is easier than ours, or you're unsure about it, give us a call. Again, if it ends up where it's not a grading scale that's like ours, or not harder than ours, that out-of-state counselor will need to convert the entire class to the SCUGP and then re-rank. That's the only way that student's going to be able to use that rank, use class rank to qualify. If the counselor's unwilling to do that, or it turns out the scale's not equal to ours or harder, then again, that student's the GPA and a standardized test score in order to qualify. We want to also mention Act 280 here because that language is in all our programs as well. This is the South Carolina Immigration Reform Act. It was created back in 2009. And basically it charges the trustees of public and independent institutions to develop a process where state scholarship and grant recipients' lawful presence in the U.S. can be verified. Now, this is important because we don't want to ever be in a situation where we just guess on a student's immigration status. We want to be sure we're able to verify them through a federal process. I won't go too deep into it. Again, there's a residency workshop, and that is on the CHU website as well. But just know that most institutions are able to use a FAFSA as their federal process to verify most of their scholarship recipients. Once they get that feedback on the student status on the FAFSA, they can kind of move forward to determining the next South Carolina residency and moving forward from that point. But again, Act 280 charges all institutions, public or independent, with developing a process where they can verify immigration status before they award anyone a state scholarship. For any of my admission folks on the call, I know this is a scholarship presentation, but Act 280 also says that if you can't verify the immigration status of that person, of that student, they're not even able to attend a public institution. I know we focus on this presentation for scholarships and grants, but for public institutions, a student can't even attend if they're not eligible, or if you're not able to verify their status with the federal government through a process. Again, we go deeper into Act 280 over the summer, but if anybody has any questions about that, I'm always willing to listen. Again, we define lawful presence as individuals who are in the U.S. legally and documented. Again, only those students whose lawful presence has been verified are going to be able to enroll at public institutions or receive a state scholarship and grant at any institution. Just to be sure everybody's on the same page with the whole residency and immigration piece program, each of the programs has a section in here that charges you all with making sure that you're complying with Act 280. Y'all, Act 280 is not a regulation, it is actual statute, it is on the books. And so we want to be sure you all are adhering to that law that was put in place for very specific reasons. If for some reason through audit it's determined that you all were not able to verify the lawful presence or chose not to verify the lawful status, we would ask that you immediately reimburse the state for the funds dispersed for a state scholarship. Next two sections are going to deal with program administration and audits, particularly with the administration. We added a section in all 5 regs because we needed to know who was your point of contact for us on your campus for each of the programs. It could be different for each program, and that's fine. But what we do each year from a CHE perspective is we send out a request just to be sure that the person we have on file as your life, your Pamela Fellows, your scholarship recipient, your scholarship contact is that same person. It can be whoever you determine to be on that campus. But we want to be sure that we have at least one person on the institutional level that we can go to as our direct contact for each of these programs. And again, it could be the same person for all the programs, but we do want to be sure that for each program, we have a person. So again, we do this every year. We go out and ask for that identification. We also ask you to identify the person on institutional level responsible for residency classification. One of the things you hear us say every summer at the workshop is that residency classification is an important part of all different parts of your institution. And so we just want to know from a general perspective who the person is on your campus we should go to when we have residency questions or constituent concerns or conflicting reports or anything like that. So again, it's usually your residency officer. Sometimes at our independent institutions, it's your director of financial aid. Whoever it is, that's perfectly fine with us. Again, that's up to you all to tell us who it is. But we just want to know at each institution who's going to be responsible for residency. You'll see in each of the regulations, there is actually a section that asks for documentation that you all should collect on each student. It goes from award notification, enrollment status, residency status, and citizenship status. There is still a certification form that we like you all to get from the student that gives you a whole different thing, a few different pieces of information in terms of whether or not they're default on the loan, convicted of felonies. That's where you collect information on that drug and alcohol related misdemeanor. Most of you have done a great job in your certification forms of actually putting the requirements and asking the students to certify that they understand. So that's a part of your certification form as well. So again, this is mainly for audit purposes. When our 2 auditors may come to your institution, this is one of the first things they're going to look at when they ask for your student record section. And again, this is in every reg we have in different places. It's usually in the program administration and audit section. Appeals. I won't talk a ton about this other than just to let you guys know that appeals for the Life and Hope Scholarship, Pamela Fellows as well, do come through CHE. So if you have a student that does not meet their continued eligibility requirements, and I do need to stress the appeals are for students who do not meet the continued eligibility requirements. They're not for students who don't meet the initial eligibility requirements. We do invite you to ask those students to appeal through CHE for a Life, Hope, or Pamela Fellow Scholarship. Our appeal cycle has seen a change over the last year. Instead of closing off the appeals in December, we now take appeals from May through February. I know we had a group of students every year that may miss the deadline, or they were only planning to come back to school in January. So those students, we had to make them wait that semester, go out of pocket, and then appeal. We have extended the appeal process now to where it is essentially year-round. We will take appeals all the way from May through February. We'll have deliberations like we normally do. We'll have an appeals meeting at the end of the year, and we will send those notifications to you. So please don't be alarmed if you see an appeal letter come to you after December, when I know you guys are used to them used to be coming through January. This from now on, you'll probably get appeal letters all the way through April as we work through them. So yes, we have extended the appeal cycle. It is pretty much the whole academic year. So you will get decisions all the way through April, maybe even May, just depending on it. bear with us. This is our first year doing it this extensive. So we may call you with some questions. You please call us with questions. If you have a student that says they're appealing, please feel free to give us a call if you want to verify that. So now we'll go through a couple sections again. We're still in those sections that are in every single regulation. One of the big ones that are in there is military mobilization. Now, we say mobilization. I think in recent years, what we've come down to when we say mobilization, we are essentially talking about periods of active duty. So the student does not necessarily have to be sent away overseas or anything like that. We are talking about periods of active duty that does include basic training. So if you have a student that is in basic training and they are missing college, because of their basic training in AIT, this section still applies to them as long as they can provide you with the documentation showing that they were active duty during these periods of training. That's usually going to be a DD-214, but also orders can suffice as well. You just want to be sure that it wasn't just orders. The student actually went on those periods of active duty, which is why we still think the DD-214 is very important. Now, when students are military mobilized, and that mobilization affects their enrollment, we are not going to penalize them for the term they're required to withdraw. As long as, again, they can provide you with the periods of active duty and show you that they were gone for military mobilization or basic training, you are not to count any of those periods against their terms of eligibility. They still have all the terms remaining. So every student gets a max of 8. Whatever terms they use, obviously in the classroom would count, but when they are active duty, you do not count those terms against them. They'll be able to use their unused terms when they are done with their mobilization, either at the summer immediately following that, if they're able to go back that summer immediately following, or if they want to tack them onto the back end, that would extend their terms of eligibility. In those cases, you just want to be sure you have, again, that DD-214 on file. They do not have to file an appeal with us as long as they're back in school within a year of their discharge. I do want to stress that you all are able to make that institutional determination at your level as long as the student enrolls within a year of discharge. Now, if they sit out a year, which they're able to do, they're allowed to sit out as much as 12 months after discharge and then come back to school and still have all their terms reserved. After 12 months, though, they do need to file the appeal with us. But if you have a student that is military mobilized and they are back with you, they come off active duty and they are back in school within the year, you do not have to send them to us for an appeal. You can use that. You can use your determinations at the institution based on when they left and their periods of active duty. We'll cover that in a minute. So again, here's where they need to provide that they must enroll within 12 months upon their discharge or demobilization and provide that documentation to you all in the financial aid office. Again, as long as you have that and it's within 12 months, you can check the criteria and you do not have to send them to us for an appeal. So here's the criteria you're going to look for students that have started their clock, started their educational experience, and then took a break to go on active duty. Service members who are enrolled in college and are mobilized for an entire year, so they missed the whole fall and spring terms. You're going to look at the prior year eligibility, and if they had that 3.0 and for life an average of 30 credit hours, for PFS 30 credit hours at the institution, and the 3.0, you can go ahead and award that student back their scholarship and save those 2 terms added to the back end or that summer. If the member is mobilized for 1 term, so they're either active duty in the fall and come back in the spring, or they went active duty, or they come with you to the fall and then take the spring off for active duty, you're still going to look for the 3.0 life GPA or 3.0 institutional GPA depending on the scholarship. But then for life purposes, we changed this about 2 years ago to where now we're looking for the average of 30 credit hours for that military mobilization. So I know this reg used to say 15. I know most of you guys are new, so you don't really care about that. But I saw some older folks on the call, some seasoned folks on the call who may be thinking 15. No, we changed this a few years ago to where it is no longer 15 credit hours. It is going to be the average of 30 credit hours. We changed this at the request of the institutions because they said we had so many students that just had a ton of AP, IB credit hours for the life scholarship or had taken a ton of hours ahead of time. and we were having to deny, or they were having to deny them because they didn't get the 15. So you had a student that may have had 75, 90 credit hours total on the books, but because they didn't get 15 that semester for the semester they were in, they had to deny the scholarship. And of course, that did seem unfair and didn't seem consistent with the whole nature of the LIFE program. And so for the LIFE scholarship, if they have the average of 30 credit hours based on the number of terms they've been in school, you were able to go ahead and award them that scholarship when they come back. And of course, you can save that term and add that to the back end that they were mobilized for that academic year. Another section that is in all the regs deals with internships, co-ops, travel, study abroad, national or international exchange programs. Very similar language here. We try to do the same thing as far as using the average when it came down to the LIFE scholarship. A couple things to remember about the co-ops, internships, travel, study abroad programs. As long as the program is approved by the home institution and the student was eligible before they left, we can allow the student to save those terms. If they don't receive the scholarship during their internship, they can, again, when they come back, use it over the summer, or they can apply to the back end as saved terms of eligibility. Again, this is only in cases where the internship, study abroad, travel, co-op is approved by the home institution. And I know we have some that are not. One of the biggest ones we get in our appeal season is Disney. So far, I haven't had an institution tell us they approved the Disney internship or it's through their college. Because obviously Disney is its own separate entity. If it's something like that where your college does not approve it, we're not going to be able to save those terms. That student is going to be responsible for all the credit hours, the GPA, and they won't be able to save those terms or add into the back end. So again, approved by the home institution, student has to be eligible before they left. But if they do that, we can definitely save those terms and allow the student to be eligible. If the student is using, if the institution awards full-time transfer credit for that internship, co-op, study abroad program, you can award the scholarship. Now, we will only be able to send the scholarship directly to you and to your institution. But if you have a process where the student can still use those funds towards charges, or you send it to that out-of-state institution in some different form, that would be totally up to you. But again, we are only going to be able to send the funds directly to you, to the student's home institution. Okay, so again, very similar language to what we said before. When a student is in one academic term of the academic year, they do the co-op internship, and then they're in school with you the other term. Very similar to what we just talked about for the military. You're now looking for an average of 30 credit hours by the end of the academic year. So again, this was another change that we made. We're using the average of 30 credit hours for our students that are gone for one semester out of the academic year. If the student is gone for the whole entire academic year, again, we're still looking at an approved internship by your institution, and they're gone for the entire academic year. Very similar to military, you're going to go back to the previous year and be sure they were eligible before they left. So when we're looking at them around here, particularly for appeals, the question we ask, were they eligible before they left? If they were, then we can start looking at was it approved by the institution? And then we start looking at that criteria to be sure the student was eligible. So again, approved by the home institution, eligible when they left. You can then either tack it onto the back end or let them use it over the summer if you guys don't award that full-time credit during that co-op, internship, study abroad, travel program. Another section that is in all the regulations is student disabilities. Again, this is really, really important. Each institution, as you know, is required to have a disability services provider. I know they're changing the name on some campuses, but it's still the office or entity where a student can go through to get accommodations to help them with any documented disability they may have to allow them to be successful. Each year, we require students to so for each academic year, we want documentation from that office. We moved to a place now where if you do it during the middle of the year, so right before the spring term, if they can give you that documentation from that office, that is acceptable as well. What we do with this section is this: you're going to hear me talk about 30 credit hours, 30 credit hours, 30 credit hours. If one of the accommodations the student receives through that office is a reduced course load for full-time status, we then would change the credit hour requirement to be whatever that load is that's prescribed by that office. So for example, in a normal year, students probably going to look to get 15 credit hours every semester, 30 credit hours every year. If they work with their office and their disability services provider, and the determination is made that they should be provided with an accommodation to be full-time at, let's just say 6 credit hours and make it simple. You all will no longer look for 30 credit hours for that year. You will look for 12, 6 in the fall, 6 in the spring, to be sure that student has met their credit hour requirement. If they have that requirement on there and they've met that requirement, you can then award them that scholarship based on that. So again, they'd only be enrolled in 6 credit hours. You can still award them the scholarship. And they'd only need 12 hours for the year in that scenario, because their load as worked out by the institution is going to be 12 credit hours for that year. One thing you'll notice here is there are no exceptions to that 3.0 life GPA. It is still got to be a 3.0 life GPA for Life and Hope. For Pamela Fellows, it's going to be a 3.0 institutional GPA. Again, there is no accommodation for the GPA. It still needs to be there. But again, the credit hours is something that can be worked out through accommodation. One thing that was changed in the regulation a few years ago, again, we heard institutions say students were going the first semester, realizing they need some assistance, and then going before the start of the second semester and getting those accommodations. We think that is still perfectly fine. So we want you to collect the document. You can accept the documentation at the start of every year or the start of every semester. The one thing we do want to be sure that you make sure that's on the documentation for this reduced course load, or the accommodations period, are when do they start and when do they end, because that gives you an ability to know what the credit hour requirement is in place. And if the student is in a situation where they need to appeal, it allows us at our level to know when were the accommodations in place, were the accommodations in place the whole time, or were they held to a different credit hour requirement at some point in time. So again, the date's really important with that. All right, so those were the sections that are in every single regulation. We're now going to shift our focus a little bit more to drill down to deal directly with Life and Hope. I'll say this ahead of time. Hope is usually like a mini version of Life. So you're going to see a smaller section of Life, but that's because you can apply most of the sections in Life to Hope. It's just Hope is a one-year program where Life can span 4 years, but they're pretty much sister programs. And so that's why the Hope section is going to be a little bit shorter. We'll focus most of our attention on Life because you're pretty much getting the same thing. Student eligibility, again, for the Life Scholarship, again, U.S. citizen, legal permanent resident. We are looking for a green card at least. Again, I can't stress this enough. Students that are on visas should not be receiving scholarships and grants, and that is across the board with any of our state programs, by the way. You do have to be a South Carolina resident. A student cannot be a South Carolina resident without first being a legal permanent resident. So if they don't have a green card, you don't even have to worry about checking them for South Carolina residency. You gotta be a citizen or legal permanent resident first. Then you start looking at residency, state residency. And remember, when we talk residency, we are talking about the residency of a parent, spouse, or guardian 99.9% of the time. There is a small case that we talk about over every summer where that might not be the case. But for the most part, you're looking for the residency of a parent. One thing that also needs to be stressed on here, the residency for the Life Scholarship, Hope Scholarship, Pamela Fellows Scholarship, but in particular, we're talking about Life and Hope here, needs to be met at the time of high school graduation. If the student crosses this high school stage and they are not a South Carolina resident, they are never going to be able to participate in the state scholarship or the Life Scholarship program or the Hope Scholarship program. So again, legal permanent resident, South Carolina resident at the time of high school graduation. If they miss that cutoff, they are not going to be eligible. So if you have a student that's moving in, that you're working with, they're still in high school and they've just moved into the state, you may want to have them contact their residency officer at the colleges they're looking to attend, because they're going to have to work through some scenarios that could allow them to be eligible. But again, they're going to depend on you all at your offices to help guide them through that process. Sometimes you can get an exception. Sometimes they can get the 12 months in by the time they move here. But by and large, what you all have to do is be sure that residency for in-state tuition and fees is met at the time of high school graduation. Also got to meet 2 of the 3 eligibility criteria. We'll talk about that in a second. And you all saw this in the other few slides back. Same language in here about not owing a refund or repayment to a state and federal aid. And of course, not being convicted of any felonies or any second or subsequent alcohol, drug-related misdemeanor in the same year. So here we get into the eligibility requirements, the academic requirements for the Life Scholarship. You all have heard this a million times, I'm sure. For the Life Scholarship to be eligible initially at a 4-year institution, public or private here in South Carolina, once residency has been confirmed and checked, you're looking for a minimum 3.0 based on that South Carolina Uniform Grade Scale. That should be somewhere on a final high school transcript for you. And then either an 1100 SAT or a 22 ACT. Now, we did lower the ACT score last year to a 22, so that's a little different. The other thing you want to know about both of these scores is they both can be super scored. So if you're looking for an SAT score, you're going to look for the SAT super score. College Board does provide that for you on the school report. And again, life is a little different because for life, you all are collecting all of this information. You're not being told their life by our offices. You all make the determination about whether or not a student is life or hope. So if you don't have a test score from a student and the student says, no, I met it by test score, you have to collect that test score from that student. They need to send it to your institution. If anybody doesn't know, I'm sure most of you know, super scoring just means you can take the best evidence-based reading score from any test they took, best evidence-based math score from any test they took, combine those 2 scores, and if that gives it 1100, that's called a super score, and they're able to meet that criteria. Works the same way for ACT for those 5 sections, and ACT is also developed a place on the school report where they go ahead and give you that super score as well. So that allows you to not have to go through multiple test score reports. It should be upfront for you to see. Or the student can rank in the top 30% of the graduating high school class. And we go through the rank. We'll talk a little bit about rank a little bit further down, but just know on the rank report, which we'll talk about again, on the rank report and on the transcript, that should match, by the way. You should be able to see what the class size is, multiply that by 0.30. That'll tell you where the cutoff is. Any student under that is going to get it. Is going to meet the rank criteria. Any student after that is not. The difference, one of the difference between the Life Scholarship is we do not rank. And we do not rank up. We do not round. We do not round up. So if you have a student, if your top 30% of your class is 29.1 students, or even 29.9 students, we'll do it that way. We'll go the other extreme. If the top 30% equates to be 29.9 students, it's going to be the top 29 students that qualify. We're not rounding up to get that 30th student. It's going to be the top 29 students. So again, for Life Scholarship, we do not rank. So that's the criteria to receive life at a 4-year institution. In order to receive life at a 2-year institution, public or private, you are simply just looking for a 3.0 final high school GPA. Again, all these GPAs are going to be based on the uniform grade policy. But for a 2-year institution, you are only looking for a 3.0 GPA. So you'll notice for 2 years, we don't need a test score. You don't need a class rank. So if you review the final high school transcript, please be sure it's a final high school transcript. But you see that final high school GPA based on the SCU GP is a 3.0, and you're at a 2-year institution, that student has met the academic criteria for a Life Scholarship. One of the big things about the Life Scholarship is terms of eligibility. So again, we talked about that clock. Remember, that clock starts with that first class after high school graduation, with the exception of that first summer. The student can take as many classes as they want that first summer. That's perfectly fine. It won't start the life clock at all. But once they take that first class in that fall and that spring, that starts the life clock. And at that point, they need to go consecutively because those terms are running consecutively till they reach 4 terms or 6 terms, depending on the program at a 2-year institution, and 8 terms overall at a 4-year institution. So again, remember, terms of eligibility start with the first class. They run consecutively, whether the student is in state, out of state, in school or out of school, at a 2-year institution or a 4-year institution. Every single term counts from that point moving forward. This is really, really important when you start counseling students that have gap years, what they call gap years, where they're actually earning credits during that gap year, or they're going out of state to schools that offer gap years, but maybe offer 1 or 2 credits. If that credit is taken at an eligible accredited institution, it is starting the life clock. If you have any questions about that, give us a call. But again, if it's at an eligible institution, and by eligible, we mean we can look it up in the federal database, federal accreditation database, it is going to start that life clock. And so if you have any questions about that, just give us a call. Within the LIFE program, there is an exception that is made for students that are placed in remedial or developmental coursework in that first academic year. Now, right now, remedial coursework is only recognized for LIFE purposes at two-year institutions, particularly technical colleges, but definitely two-year institutions. The stipulation is this: if the student is in less than 12 non-remedial remedial credit hours, so not a full-time course load schedule, up to 11 credit hours, and at least 3 hours of remedial or developmental coursework. Now, again, we depend on each individual two-year technical college to tell us what classes are remedial, what classes are not. So if you're at a four-year institution and you're confused about the student's first year, you think one of the classes might be remedial, contact the local technical college where the student went to school at. Here's an important caveat here. Even within the technical college system, my understanding is that classes that are remedial or developmental at one tech school may not be at the same. So you're going to need to work directly with that technical college where that student came from to see if they qualify under this section. And again, the way they qualify is this: if in that first year, fall or spring, the student had at least 3 credit hours of remedial coursework, but not 12 hours of non-remedial coursework, so that could be up to 11. You are then in a position where that first semester where the student was remedial or up to 2 semesters does not start their life clock. They do not lose a term of eligibility. And this is the case even if they receive lottery tuition assistance in this particular section. So again, 3 credit hours of remedial coursework, no more than 11 hours of non-remedial coursework at a technical college. You can then pause that student's clock. They do not start the terms of eligibility, and that student has all 8 terms remaining once that period ends. Now, they can do this up to the first year of initial college enrollment. So we call them remedial. So if they're remedial in the fall, remedial in the spring, again under that 11 and 3, they save that whole year, and they can start off fresh that next year. Even though it might technically be their second physical year, for life purposes, it is still going to be their first year of life eligibility. They get all the terms. The one thing we do see from time to time that we've had to try to help institutions guard against is not being remedial in the fall and then getting a remedial class in the spring. That doesn't fit this provision, so we've had to still start that student's clock. So I want to be sure that the student finishes all their remedial coursework before they start that non-remedial coursework full-time load. And again, this is only for the first year of attendance. After the first year, even if that student is in remedial coursework, they are not eligible for this provision at all. So again, just a nice little chart to give you what this means. If they're first time entering freshman, less than 12 non-remedial coursework credit hours, but at least 3 credit hours of remedial coursework, you're going to be able to delay that initial term of life eligibility so you won't start the clock. They can do this up to a year. So if they either get to 12 credit hours of non-remedial coursework in the spring or that following fall, you can essentially pause that clock for those terms they're there. So we've talked about initial eligibility. We'll talk now about continued eligibility and how you keep that life scholarship. And this is also important because, again, this is done at the institutional level. In order to retain that life scholarship, the student has to beat a 3.0 life GPA, and the life GPA is the cumulative average of all coursework, all good college coursework taken at all eligible institutions, but also an average of 30 credit hours for every year. So you're looking at 30 credit hours earned after the first year, 60 total earned after the second year, and 90 earned after the third year. We say average because for the life scholarship, we allow students to use AP credit hours, IB credit hours, dual enrollment credit hours, CLEP credit hours. All of that can go into it. So you could have a student that comes into you after earning an associate's in high school even. They may come in with 60 credit hours. That student still has to be full-time in that first year. So they still have to be in at least 12 fall and spring. But in theory, that student has already met the credit hour requirement for the Life Scholarship before they even hit your campus. And that's one of the cool things about the Life program. It provides the student with a ton of flexibility in using those credit hours. Again, the 3.0 Life GPA still includes all those courses and grades. But again, for that credit hour, they can do an average of 30 credit hours. And so a student can maybe even take a lighter load in each year, maybe 24 hours for the year, as long as they have those hours either from high school or from a prior college hour or summer school to help them meet those 30, 60, 90 marks every year. We also have students, though, that start mid-year. And so sometimes we see a little bit of confusion, so I want to cover this as well. If a student starts mid-year, when we say mid-year, we mean their very first semester of good college work is a spring term. So either they were remedial in the fall and now they're starting their full-time load in the spring, or they graduated high school early and they're starting in the spring, or they graduated high school on time and just sat out the fall and now they're starting in the spring. So in any scenario where the student is starting in the spring and they are eligible for the Life Scholarship, that's important, this is how they would keep the Life Scholarship. You're going to look for a 3.0 Life GPA and at least 15 credit hours by the end of that first academic year. Now, for this student, we're saying an academic year is the spring and the summer. So remember, they sat out the fall, or they didn't go in the fall, or they were still in high school in the fall, spring and summer. That is going to be the end of their academic year. That student needs 15 credit hours minimum and at least a 3.0 Life GPA. If they do that, you can award them Life Scholarship for this whole next year. You don't have to check mid-year the next year. And then what you're looking for is this: 45 hours after that next year, 75 after that what would be, I guess, their second or third year. And to get their last traditional semester, because remember, this student will have started in the spring and ending in the fall, they need 105 hours by the end of that third year to get that one last term they'd be possibly eligible for, which again would probably be in the fall. If we have students in these fifth-year programs, there are only 3 left in the state eligible 5-year programs that are approved by CHE. That student would have an extra criteria of 135 hours to get their last term as well. But most of our students are going to end at the end of this third year or third academic year. And so for that student, you're basically looking at 15 after that first spring and summer, 45, 75, 105 after that last summer to get one last term, which will probably be a fall. Now, I stress in this slide that this is only for the student that started mid-year and they are eligible for the scholarship because that's important as we talk about this next one. We do have students that start mid-year and they are not eligible for the Life Scholarship. And sometimes that's because they haven't met the criteria out of high school. And sometimes that's even if they have a GED. Remember, GED students and even adult ed students that don't have a GPA are not eligible in the first year for the Life Scholarship. So in those cases where those students decide they want to start college mid-year, they are in a different situation. If a student starts college mid-year and they are not eligible for the Life Scholarship, that student needs to wait 3 terms to receive the scholarship because, again, you can't give it to them by the end of the first semester because you got to wait a year, and we don't check eligibility mid-year. So that student is in a situation at that point where they are needing a 3.0 Life GPA and 45 credit hours by the end of the 3rd term. So again, student starts in the spring, they're not eligible. You go spring, fall, spring. At the end of that 2nd spring, you can then check for 3.0 and 45. If they receive that, then that student can start off the Life Scholarship. However, that student will only have between 1 and 3 terms left at an eligible 2-year institution, and they would only have 5 terms left overall. So again, if you have a student that's in that situation and you can get to the point where you can advise them, please make them aware of that. Now, there's no stipulations on LTAP for that student. They can still receive that program, but as far as life, that's kind of where they end up landing if they are mid-year starts and they are not eligible. For those students who earn GEDs, and again, GED or an adult ed diploma that does not have a GPA, that student would still need to wait a year and earn the Life Scholarship based on their college performance. So if your student graduates high school with a GED or adult ed diploma, that student will go the first year. You'll then check that student for like you would anybody else for a 3.0 life GPA and 30 average of 30 credit hours. If they have that, you would move them right on into the life scholarship program, and they can have it for a maximum of 6 semesters remaining. Life GPA. So we want to talk a little bit about this because this is one of the hot button topics that are going on across the state. We talk about keeping the scholarship. 3.0 life GPA is a requirement. Life GPA is the cumulative GPA across all credit hours and grades earned at all institutions that are eligible. They all have to be rolled in, whether it's your institution or not. And it does include dual enrollment. And that's one of the hot button topics going on across the state. So here's how you would calculate a life GPA. Every course at your institution is going to have a value for that grade. So C's are usually 2. UC is usually 2 points. You are going to take the value of that grade. You're going to multiply it by the credit hours the course is worth. So for example, when you look at this English 101, the very first one, a C at this institution is worth 2 points. The credit hours are 3 for that course. You multiply the 2 by the 3. That's how you get 6 quality points. You would do that for every eligible course. So every course on this transcript outside of the AP stuff would be included in this dual enrollment, in this life GPA calculation. So you're going to add up all of these quality points down the page. You're going to end up with 102 quality points. Now, for the life GPA, remember, it is every eligible course. So you're gonna divide that 102 by all the eligible GPA hours on this transcript, all of them. So you're gonna get 102 divided by 36, and so this student's life GPA is gonna be a 2.83. So this student is not eligible. So here's the thing that trips a lot of students up. Most of you have wonderful transcripts that may not include grades earned at other institutions. That's fine if they're remedial. But if those classes are non-remedial and they're taken at eligible institutions, you are going to need to include that in your calculation of the life GPA. What students do from time to time is they only look at the stuff they've taken at your institution. So in that scenario, if we're only looking at grades and credit hours earned at the institution, they're going to do the fall of 16, the spring of 17. They're going to come up with that 84 institutional quality points. They're going to divide that by for the 27 credits earned at the institution, and that's going to show them a 3.11 at the bottom of their transcript. And that's where a lot of students get confused. They look at the 3.11 institutional GPA at your institution and don't realize that all those C's, those 2 C's from dual enrollment and that transfer C from another institution had to be included in the life GPA. And once we added that all in, that life GPA, which is the one we go off of, is a 2.83. This is the scenario we're seeing at tons of institutions across the state. As more and more students get into dual enrollment, we just got to be sure that we're on our P's and Q's and we're providing a clear place, either on the student account, on the transcript, however you want to do it, where that student can see exactly what their life GPA is. And I think every institution does this. So again, this is just a reminder. Please be sure there is a clear and easily accessed place where the student can find out exactly what their life GPA is, so that they can go on that website, find it, and see what their life GPA is, because that's the one you guys are using for the calculation. Now, a proviso that is in place for this upcoming year. So for all the students on your campus right now that are freshmen that took dual enrollment, you will have to do a different life GPA calculation possibly for them. Proviso 117.172 is in the state budget as of right now. And what it says is this: for the current fiscal year, so that is this year, the funds allocated to Commission on Higher Education for life scholarships, no money shall be withheld from a student otherwise eligible for their second year of life based solely upon a grade earned in dual enrollment. So for all your current freshmen, for all your current for all your current students on campus right now, for your freshmen, you're going to need to do a life GPA calculation at the end of the year on those students, and be sure that something from dual enrollment isn't preventing them from being eligible. Now, one thing we see here, it is for their second year, so that's why we can only limit it to the freshmen. But you're going to need to go back and check all of them. Be sure they don't have a dual enrollment grade that is bringing them down. If they do, we're going to need to be sure that that's not what's preventing them from getting the life scholarship. Now, again, if they've had if their performance on your campus the first year was not great, and it's not pinpointed back to a dual enrollment grade, this isn't talking about them. They wouldn't be eligible. But if you have that student in that scenario where they were doing really well on, they did well on your campus, probably a 3.0. But once that GPA had to be calculated, including dual enrollment, you're going to have to come up with a GPA calculation that excludes that dual enrollment. It's probably your institutional GPA right now. And that student can receive the scholarship for their second year as long as they're at a 3.0 once the dual enrollment was taken out. Now, the catch is this: at the end of their second year, everything goes back to normal. So even though the dual enrollment was not included for year one for your calculation after the freshman year, it does come back into play for your calculation at the end of that sophomore year. We talked about this summer. Again, I asked for feedback once you guys have done this. If you are willing to provide me some feedback on how this worked and what it prevented you from doing, what it did to you, whatever, please send me that in writing. Please send me an email. If you want to do it anonymously, you want to try, or you want me to keep you anonymous, please let me know that. But we want to be able to report back how this proviso went this year. We talked about this for disability, so I'm not going to cover this too much, but remember, if the student is approved for a full-time load that is less than 12 credit hours, that student can then receive the scholarship at that reduced load, and their renewal criteria is lessened as well. So again, if I'm approved for 6 hours at full-time status through my provider on your campus, then I only need 6 per semester, which puts me at 12 for the year. So instead of 30, I'm looking for 12. So again, be sure you have dates and documentation on this, because once you're audited, you want to be able to show why you provided a student a scholarship at 6 hours and why you provided a student that didn't meet the 30 credit hour requirement. And that's because they didn't need to. Coming down to the end, I think, or close enough to it, we're talking about life scholarship and scholarship enhancement now. You all remember the enhancement. The enhancement is an additional $2,500 stacked on top of your life scholarship for students that are majoring in math or science majors that are approved by CHE. There's a whole process to get your institutions approved, to get your majors and coursework approved. Please see Ms. Tanya Weigold if you're interested in knowing more about that process. She is our SEER enhancement, our enhancement specialist here at CHE. In order to receive enhancement, of course, student has to receive the underlying scholarship. So you can't receive a life enhancement without receiving the life scholarship. You also have to be degree seeking in an eligible major. And again, that can be found on our website. And then during the first year, a student needs to earn at least 14 credit hours in math or science coursework at an eligible institution. Now they can do it they can do all 14 in math, all 14 in science, 7 and 7, 8 and 6, 13 and 1. However they do it is fine, but it does need to be math or science coursework, and it does need to be by the end of the first year. We say by the end of the first year because a student can use AP, IB, dual enrollment to meet that 14 credit hour requirement as well. For questions about majors that are eligible and requirements, you can always go to the CHE website. And again, please note students can only receive the enhancement at a 4-year institution. And please remember that the student can earn the credit hours at a 2-year institution. So if I went my first year at a 2-year institution, got my 14, transferred to a 4-year institution for my second year, what you would do as the 4-year receiving institution is go back to the transcript, be sure those 14 credit hours in math and science were earned, but then you can then pick the student up beginning in that second year with the enhancement. We covered this. This is the enhancement criteria. And again, we covered this as well. And you see it's an additional $2,500. It starts in the second year. That's important because I know we have students that come on campus with so many wonderful credit hours earned in high school. They may come in again with an associate's. No matter how many credit hours they come in with, no matter what you call them on campus for their first year, we still consider them to be a first-year student. And so a first-year student, no matter how many hours they came in with, is not going to be enhancement eligible. That enhancement does start in the second year. This just says if a student starts mid-year, starts mid-year, you are able to check them for the enhancement at the end of their next fall term. So if I start mid-year, I've got that spring, that summer, and that fall to get my 14 credit hours. If I have that, you check that, you can then start my enhancement the spring of my second year. So this is the only time we ever ask you guys to check anything mid-year. It's your enhancement recipients, and this is just to be sure they don't lose terms that they may have been eligible for. And just remember, you guys are going to check the enrollment in the degree seeking major at the end of each, at the start of each year. You all established your deadline for the enhancement. So you all are going to be the ones who let us know, did the student meet our deadline on our institution for being in an eligible major? And with that, that kind of completes our life review. I'm going to go very quickly through Hope to be respectful of everybody's time and then answer. I see a few questions in the chat that we can get to. Remember, Hope is sort of like a diet life. It's real small. It's a smaller version, so most of the things run similar. Cool thing about the Hope, you're only looking for a 3.0 upon high school graduation. Again, you got to be a U.S. citizen, legal permanent resident. So again, at the time of high school graduation, you can't be receiving LTAP, life, or Paladin Fellows to be a recipient of Hope. And that same second or subsequent drug, alcohol-related misdemeanor language is in the Hope program as well. The amount of the Hope Scholarship is $2,800. We can do $1,400 in the fall, $1,400 in the spring, towards that first year. Now, the Hope Scholarship is a one-year freshman-only scholarship. So it is only for that student's freshman year. So it's only up for 2 years of enrollment. And the student is receiving a Hope Scholarship with the hope that they'll eventually move into the Life program by earning a 3.0 Life GPA. So that Life GPA still comes into play for this student as well. And then 30 credit hours by the end of that first year. So again, start out as a Hope recipient, 3.0 Life GPA, still using that same calculation. Average of 30 credit hours. By the end of the first year, you move them right on into the Life program. Remember that the Life program all these programs operate on a clock, and the first year of Hope is basically the first year of Life. So I would transition to Life, but I would only have 6 semesters or 3 years remaining because I've used my first term of Life as a Hope recipient. Remember, we're basing everything off initial college enrollment. And then for the Hope Scholarship, there's a different caveat here from the Life. If we're talking about that student that starts mid-year and is eligible for the Hope Scholarship, that student needs a 3.0 and 15 credit hours by the end of that first summer. If they do that, you move them right on into the Life program. If that student does not meet that 15 credit hour requirement, or the 3.0, you can award them the second term of Hope that next fall, but they won't get anything else after that following spring. And so this is how you move from Hope to Life if you're mid-year. Year-round scholarships, this is a proviso every year in the budget. Just remember that students that the authorization for Life or Paladin Fellows Awards over the summer has been included in this year's budget. I think it's still proviso 1115. I have to check on that. But remember, when this first came out, this allows students to use up to 3 terms of scholarship, Life or Paladin Fellows, in the same academic year. So a student can use it fall, spring, and summer. Remember, we got together and developed some guidelines with the financial aid community for the program. Those guidelines are still accessible on the CHU website. You can always look and see what kind of things the year-round did to the Life and Paladin Fellows program. It's actually 1113, so we're able to provide that proviso here. So again, this still provides you that guidance where you can award a 3rd term of Life or Paladin Fellows in the same academic year, as long as the student is enrolled full-time, which means at least 12 credit hours, and as long as the student was eligible at the end of the spring. So the way you're eligible for year-round is, again, be eligible at the end of the spring term, means you can't be using the summer to get eligible, and you have to be enrolled full-time. So unfortunately, if a student enrolls in the institution that's not awarding full-time credits over the summer, they wouldn't be able to use this. The one thing to remember about this, 2 things that change with year-round. Number 1, always remember, even if they use 3 terms over the 3rd term over the summer, that is still a 3rd term of their 8. So you want to be sure the student is truly being accelerated towards completing early, because they're using the 3rd term in that same academic year. The other thing to remember is this: year-round change how we look at eligibility now. If a student is eligible at the end of the spring term, that student is going to be eligible for the whole next year. It doesn't matter what they do over the summer, whether they go or they don't. They are eligible for the whole next year based on what they did at the end of the spring. So again, if I'm eligible at the end of the spring, I am eligible for the next year. No matter if I take 12 hours over the summer and I bomb, fail them all, I am still eligible for that next year if I was eligible at the end of the spring. That's really important. And again, remember, you can't use it if you're trying to use the summer term to get eligible. Transcripts, you all have seen this. Just know that these are requirements for our official final high school transcripts. They must say SCUGP. They have to be an official final high school transcript that is dated 3 days on either side of graduation, but no later than June 15th. So we'll take a date calculated all the way up to 3 days prior to graduation or after graduation, but no later than June 15th in either case. And remember, the grades, final grades and ranking cannot include grades earned after the graduation date of the school year. So we know we have students sometimes that maybe don't quite meet the finish line. Maybe they had to be thrown back into a class to meet the requirements. If that's the case, that student has then officially been given more time to get a 3.0 or a better rank, or they should be pulled out of the rank actually. And so they're not going to be eligible for that first year. I won't go through these. Just know that the transcript needs to have a valid signature, SCUGP, date calculated. Again, we talked about that. And then the rank must be clearly demonstrated on the transcript if that school ranks. Please know a rank report also needs to be submitted to CHE as well. We talked about what they need to do for an out-of-state high school, so just know this slide is still in place. It says everything I told you earlier. Just remember that a rank report should be provided if that school ranks. It's going to have to include every student in that academic class, and if the GPA, if the grading scale is not substantially different from ours, or if it is easier than ours, we're going to need every student in that class to be re-ranked based on the SCUGP. Class rank policies, just know that no two students can have the same rank. We want every student to have one specific rank in the class. All rank reports are going to come to us, so I think we'll be able to handle this for the most part. And just know that we'll ask the high school to make sure that they that they separate which student is in what place in class. However, if you do receive two students that are have the same rank on the transcript, and you notice it, please feel free to give us a call. In order for a student to use rank from any in-state, out-of-state, public, private, virtual, charter, or homeschool association where they're going to use rank, they do have to have a rank policy on file with CHE. Again, that should be one of the questions that you ask. We should have all rank policies on file. So if you have a question about it, just give us a call about it. And then rank reports, I think, is one of the last things. Just know that a rank report, again, all those should be at CHE starting next year. But if you're still dealing with any of those, just know the rank report should have all the students seeking diplomas, GPAs, class ranks, show a date calculated no later than June 15th. The rank report and the transcript should match, y'all. If they don't match, there's probably an issue and we need to get that settled. Again, hopefully beginning with the class of 24, this will all be our problems. Y'all don't have to worry about it. But again, we do ask for your help with this as we move forward with it. You all should have received a memo at your institutions on June 15th, of this past summer, letting you know that from beginning with the class of 24, all ranking schools must submit their final 12th grade ranking report to CHE no later than June 30th of the academic year. We'll begin collecting those. They're in the portal right now. If you have questions on how to access those out of the portal, I'm going to ask you contact Ms. Weigold or Ms. Harris in our office, and I'll put their contact information up in about 2 slides, thankfully. Again, ranking schools will no longer need to see the ranking reports to you all. Hopefully this change makes it a little bit easier on you guys. You all will be able to pull all class ranks out of the CHE portal, starting with the class of 24. You can actually go there now and see it. Last thing we're going to cover, just to be sure we're all on the same page, early graduate versus graduating early. Just know that a student who is an early graduate is a student that is a senior graduating mid-year. So they're not going to be considered a part of that spring cohort. So this is either that student that is finished their junior year, but took some stuff over the summer and was able to finish before school started again, or it's the student starting the senior year and they finished in January, say, or December or January. For those students, for the Life Scholarship, the Department of Ed has told the high schools those students have to be removed from class rank. And so for the Life Scholarship, they won't have a 12th grade class rank. So for that student in that situation, that student is going to need to use the GPA and the standardized test score. We do also still want them to fill out the early graduation application at your institution. Remember, we turned that process over to you all a few years ago. So please be sure you get their final high school transcript, possibly a letter from the school that just confirms they've completed the requirements, and then be sure that again, that student has finished all the requirements and you don't have a work in progress transcript. We saw this quite a bit this past summer over the last few weeks because we had a number of students that were completing early and it looked like they had graduated after the date of the class. And really all they were doing was they had finished a junior year, they had taken econ and government over the summer and they were able to get out before school started again at their high school. Please check, y'all. Don't assume that student is graduating late and they're not eligible. Please check and be sure, because a lot of times you can look at the transcript and just see maybe 3 years of high school work. Sometimes that's a thing, and you can always call the high school. It's no problem. They're glad to help. We don't want them. They don't want their students to be held up any more than you all do. So just be sure you check with them for your early graduates. For graduating early, this is the student that was able to, they started the year as a junior and was able to finish and walk out with that senior class. That student is easy for hope in life. That student is able to use rank because that high school is going to re-rank them in that senior class. The only thing I would say with this is be careful, just depending on when the high school moves them into that senior class, that could change a rank. And so you want to be sure that they're not sending you different transcripts, or we'll check together to be sure they're not sending us different ranks in class. If they send a rank report directly to you after this year, be sure to let them know they need to send that directly to us so that you all don't have to be burdened with that. We'll pull everything out of the portal and everybody will be on the same page. So with that, that does complete the deep dive into the LIFE program. Reach out to us with any other questions, comments, or concerns that you may have. This is our contact information. We look forward to hearing from you guys on any of these issues, anything you need help with. Please don't hesitate to reach out. We look for, again, we want to help. That's why we're here. So with that, do you guys want to